I'm just blowing into the mic at this point. I am just about ready. I know. Right back here? Is that about right?
About there, yeah.
Right about here? You know, I had the funniest conference call ever today.
Back up. A little more, right there, yeah.
Has anyone ever else been on a conference call when you're talking about, some big new company initiative? There's always one guy that's in his car and his cell phone you're hearing, he doesn't mute himself and you can hear all this stuff. We're doing this and here's what we hear. Snoring. And for 30 minutes, and it's getting louder and louder and louder. And then they're asking if there's any questions. And there was just a ton of questions, I think, because everyone wanted to prove that they weren't the ones snoring. So finally it was like, my question, I was like, who's snoring? And some people laugh, some people groan, but and then the big boss gets on and he goes, we're really so excited. And then the snore gets so loud. Then he goes, oh goodness. I don't even know what they said on the call. I was laughing too hard the whole time. *6, mute. It was extraordinary. I've never seen anything like it. I'm dead serious. What a nightmare. Who falls asleep at 3 o'clock? 4 Central, 1 Pacific. And *6 yourself before you fall asleep. They didn't even take roll call. Just don't even be on it. You said that? I think it was a kid trolling. It could be, somebody hacks, Go meeting or something and then plays snoring on there. I don't know. Would be fun. All right. Okay. Well, let's get going. All right. Enough stand up. All right. Wait. I know. I was waiting for you, Adam. Now I feel like that guy at the Reason rally.
Give me a second. Okay, let's start recording on Matrox. We're good. Okay, let me get a clap. No, I'm sorry. No, that's for me. Okay, start.
All right. Welcome to the Mythicist Milwaukee Tuesday night special, as I call it, or the secular discussion group. Tonight, before I introduce our speaker, we do have the Myth Information Conference 4 coming up, so reserve the weekend of September 30th. YouTubers Shoe on Head and Armored Skeptic are going to be there. Melissa Chen, cognitive dissonance podcasters, as well as Scathing Atheists, but a whole host of others that aren't speaking but will be available. So the after party's really going to be cool. Seth Andrews, Matt Dillahunty, there's more, Aaron Ra, and there's plenty more that I'm probably missing, including Miscavige's father, Allie Jackson. That it's going to be really cool. So definitely reserve September 30th. Tickets will be online pretty soon. I don't know if they're actually up yet. David Miscavige is the Scientology cult leader, if you will, and Ron Miscavige is his father, who lives in West Allis, who's disowned and speaking out now. So, an interesting guy. The debate is between Azra Normani. Thank you. I got cue cards coming from my right. The debate, which is part of it, will be Azra Normani versus Faisal Al-Muhtar, and it's going to be the future of Islam and immigration and the Trump's America, or the world Trump, something like that. Either way, it's going to be really good. Azra Normani actually got a lot of crap voting for Trump. Faisal actually can't vote, but would have voted for Hillary. They're both similar in a lot of ways, but different. I think it'll be a good discussion and things that people need to talk about. I know Bill Maher said that liberals need to talk about these kind of things. And we're showing, I was going there, but wow, Sean, right? It's like you'd make a great nagging wife. No, I am I know, it was terrible, but true. Anyways, the movie will be Batman and Jesus, which we're making homemade, and it will include a whole host of the people I talked about. It is going to be like a juxtaposition of it's both a documentary about the movement of religions and how they assimilate from each other, but also juxtaposing 2,000 years in the future and what if the religion were Batman and how that might look like if myth is history or not. So it's going to take a fair look at that. And tonight, we've got Laverne here, who I've only met a couple of times, and definitely a free thinker. Doesn't describe himself as atheist, but it's definitely not a dogmatist. I'll let him tease out exactly what his worldview is. But big fan of philosophy. My mic cut out. Big fan of philosophy, very smart, and definitely a free thinker. And he's going to talk to us about radical skepticism from Descartes to Nietzsche. Is something I've been looking forward to. So educate us on some philosophy. Welcome, Laverne.
All right. Got to do that differently. Sorry. I'll get out. I got it.
You got it, okay.
Yeah, eventually. Eventually.
You might have to turn the remote on. It might be on.
No, it was on. It was on. You just gotta hit the bottom left.
Yeah, I did.
It's not working.
Oh, there it goes. All right. Once upon a time. What do you think? Once upon a time. Is that a newspaper story I'm going to tell you about?
That's fairy tale.
No. It's a fairy tale, right? You expect a fairy tale when I say once upon a time. Well, once upon a time, there were some alternate facts. Ah, yes. Once upon a time, there were some other facts. And maybe they were alternate to some other people. We've arrived in a day when alternate facts make sense to some people. We've arrived in a day when story is the point. Narrative is where we're going. It's always about what story are you trying to tell? And how does it advantage you or your group? We've left history behind. History is dead. Did you know that? 20 years ago, a guy wrote a great, very famous article in one of the scholarly magazines. He declared that history was dead, and everybody looked around and said, yeah, it is. Because you can't tell history anymore. Because nobody agrees upon what the facts were. How did we get there? How did we get to the point where I can sit and I can see something, I can record it, I can bring it on, put it on YouTube, and everybody look at it and says, that's just propaganda. I had a person a while back, I was talking to a lady, and I quoted a study at the University of Louisville. I told her where it was at, a blind, double-blind study in a scientific magazine. And I told her what the conclusion, I quoted the guy in the conclusion. And she said, that's just right-wing propaganda. Facts don't mean anything anymore, do they? Facts themselves are myths. So how do you distinguish one from another? And how did we get there? That's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk at the very beginning at where I think it all started. I'm going to talk about Descartes. Now this is, sadly enough, after I wrote to Brian and told him what I was going to do, this is only the first third of what I can really do, what I really wanted to do. This will talk about Descartes and how he got to where he got, and then I will take a short period of time in telling you how it affected post-structuralism, which is the time we are in today, where narrative is king. All right. First of all, Descartes lived in an age of controversy, age of argument and wars. He said of his early childhood that when he went to school, everybody was always arguing about things. There was no settled idea what was right or what was wrong. He said that theologians certainly couldn't get anywhere. They were always arguing. Scholars agreed about everything, and the only thing that had come around to be a suggestion of something that you could hang your hat on was empirical knowledge. The idea that if I touch it, if I see it, if I smell it, it's got to be real. Philosophy had failed. In fact, Descartes says of his thing, I have been raised on letters from my childhood, and because I was convinced that through them I might acquire a clear and steady knowledge of everything that is useful for life. I possessed a tremendous desire to learn them. But as soon as I had completed this entire course of study, at the end of which one is ordinarily received into the ranks of the learned, I changed my mind. I changed my mind entirely, for I was embarrassed by so many doubts and errors which appeared in no way to profit me in my attempt at learning, except that more and more I discovered my ignorance. I think sometimes that's the way I feel. The more I know, the more ignorant I become. But I think in Descartes' thing, he blamed the people that were training him. They couldn't seem to agree. His view of philosophy was, of philosophy I shall say only that I was aware that philosophy had been cultivated over several centuries by the most excellent minds who have ever lived, but that, nevertheless, there is nothing about which there is not some dispute, and thus nothing that is not doubtful. And in that, I was not so presumptuous as to hope to fare any better than any others, and indeed, that considering how there can be various opinions that are held by learned people about very same matter, without there having been any more than one opinion being true, I decided to take to be virtually false everything that was merely probable. Think about that for a moment. Merely probable. Do you believe that any of these chairs have ever broken when someone sat in them? Possibly, right? I would bet on it. I would bet that a chair is broken when someone sat on it. So he would have to throw out the chairs. Can't sit in a chair. And yet he doesn't, of course, because that's not practical for one thing, and because he's not thinking in those terms. But if you think about it, we're carried by probability. Now, interestingly enough, that is not something they would have thought in his century. Probability, and the idea of probability as being part of truth, develops later on. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay, so therefore, how that view affected his view of other sciences was this. As to other sciences, since they derive their principles from philosophy, I judged that one could not have built anything solid upon foundations having so little firmness. In other words, he didn't believe the sciences either. Okay. Now, sciences in his day were natural sciences, which is a lot broader category than they are today. They weren't nearly as rigorous or constructed. Pardon?
When's Descartes?
Descartes was born in 1596 and died in 1649. I remember that day he died. Oh, no, not. Just kidding. Just kidding. That's right, honey. All right. The reason Descartes gives for that his doubt is not only that the answers given to many problems were convoluted, contradictory, and confused, but that the authors of the various opinions were themselves not to be trusted. So Descartes has a very downward look on any learning that he's had, because it's all convoluted. He's looking for certainty. That's what he's looking for. Where can I go to be certain that what I'm saying is true? Most of us want that, I think. Most of us would love to have something like that, but most of us learn pretty quickly in our intellectual capacities that, number one, we're not smart enough to get there, and number two, probably there's no there to get to. And we'll talk about that in a little while. Okay, so that's where Descartes starts with. He concludes from that the higher the cost of finding truth, the more likely a person is to have found the truth. Okay, so he says personal knowledge is more likely to find the truth than scholarly knowledge. Okay, here's what I tell people. You go to university, if you spend as much time in academia as I did in my younger life, you find out that most of the academics are not scholars. Okay? How I define scholar is somebody who really wants to know the truth. Most academics are technicians, and they're very, very, very good at this particular point. 17th century armor, okay? Or how to build a bridge. But when it comes to applying philosophy to their whole life, they aren't interested. They aren't using their brilliant mind across their whole life. Most of them are not interested. They just want the paycheck, and they want to publish to get that paycheck. So, as Descartes says, I could discover much more truth in reasoning that each person, in the reasoning that each person makes concerning matters that are important to him, whose outcome ought to cost him dearly later on if he has judged incorrectly, than in those reasonings that a man of letters makes in his private room, which touch on speculations producing no effect and which for him have no other consequence except perhaps that the more they were removed from common sense, he will derive all those variety from them. For he will have to employ that much more wit and artifice in attempting to make them probable. In other words, you only publish speculation that's new. If I wanted to publish a book on the history of Wisconsin, it better be a darn good book because there's plenty of them out there, right? And that's what his scholars always want to publish something new because actually get published. And so what he's saying is they go off into these speculations and they put forth ideas that their careers are tied to, and then they have to defend those, and it becomes a lot. That was his experience. And okay, so the example he provides in this case, he says that, so because of that, because the personal investment is much more important than scholarly investment, he says, and a single mind is more capable of producing a good systematic analysis than the layered approach of philosophers over the centuries, annotating, commenting upon, refuting, and refuting the refutations of others. Actually, that's my paragraph there. That's a summary of what he says. For example, often there's less perfection in the works made by several pieces than in works made by the hands of several masters than in those works of which one master has worked. This is his example from architecture. Okay? Thus, one sees that a building undertaken and completed by a single architect are commonly more beautiful and better ordered than those several architects have tried to patch up using old walls that have been built for other purposes. Okay, so he's saying that the individual mind, and you know, most of us have experienced that. I get letters ever so often from English departments, and for various reasons, and I can always tell when it was the English department that wrote the letter. First of all, it's long, it's wordy, and makes no sense. But if a single person writes that same letter, it's usually more concise, gets to the point, and has a style to it. Letters by committee are terrible things and should be banned, and anybody who uses them should be shot. Okay, maybe, okay, a little overboard there. Okay, all right, so what he says, I'm going to come up with a better way. He says, since it's better to start over and build for yourself and rely upon what has been previously built by others, he says, I could not do better than to try once and for all to get rid of all beliefs that I had accepted from birth out of my mind, so that once I reconciled them with reason, I might again set up either others, better ones, or even the same ones. And I firmly believe that by this means, I would succeed in conducting my life much better than were I to build only on the foundations or lean on the principles of which I permitted myself to be persuaded in my youth, without ever having examined whether or not they were true. This always reminds me of Socrates, the unexamined life is not worth living. I think it was Socrates who said that. No, he said, know thyself. Who said, do you remember who said the unexamined life is not worth the living? I can't remember. My brain went dead there. A few, though few, he says, would be able to do this because they are too intellectually feeble or too lazy. And that, sadly, is why he says at one point, he says, it's better for those who are too feeble to actually attempt this just to carry on as they have in their whatever philosophy or religion they're currently in. Okay. Yes?
Can we react to what was said?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, yeah.
Okay. I'll present a dissenting point of view in terms of Descartes' position that the individual can produce better, can come closer to the truth than say a group effort. In my view, there is a value. I mean, there are some people that work better alone, and there are some people that if they work alone, they just drift further off into the weeds.
Mm-hmm.
And
Unabomber? I'm kidding.
well, Unabomber, I guess he would fall in that.
Yeah, just
And so, in modern academics, and you may be critical of that, but there's an editorial process, there's a peer review process, and I think there's a value to that. Yeah. And in effect, that's sort of saying this is a group effort. And oftentimes, my son's in academics, and oftentimes, most of the time, he's collaborating with other people, and they come up with a product together.
Yeah, and
it's a better product than any one of them would have come up with.
I think you're actually right, but in general speaking, the papers that are written are ultimately written by one person. It's in their voice. And they get the final credit. My point, I agree with you actually, and in the critique part of it, that's one of the things I will bring up, is that in fact Descartes tends to forget the role of language itself in knowledge. And because he does that, he doesn't appreciate the communal aspect of it. Yeah, good point there.
yeah.
Could you, I'm a little lost with the aspect of what you just said. Meaning, I'm trying to figure out what you mean by that.
By what?
Community.
Oh.
Communal aspect. Community aspect.
Oh, the community language is a communal thing.
Oh, okay.
So you can't have, nobody has their own language. We share it with somebody.
Okay.
Yeah, and we learn it from somebody. Yeah, that's all.
Nothing big, complex, too complex there. Just. Yeah. All right. Which one? So he decides he's going to come up with a better way, and in the end, he comes out to decide that he's going to just doubt everything. Let's see if I can find where I'm at. He says, the single resolution, detach oneself from all the beliefs that one has accepted as true, is not an example that ought to be followed by everyone. As he says, most people are too intellectually feeble or another part he says that they're lazy. So he comes to this problem that he's going to doubt everything unless it has to. And from that, he makes a judgment of truth in himself. See if we can get the next slide. Yeah. Okay. So what he does when he comes to that point is he says, I'm going to decide for myself what is true. Knowledge resides in me. Okay? That's central to Descartes, is the movement of knowledge from the authority around him to himself personally. Each knower knows. Authority is not to be trusted. That's his reflection upon scholars in his world, other philosophers. And starting over is possible. Those are three things he kind of concludes. You can wipe your slate and start all over. Okay. From this, he gets the 4 rules of his investigation. Reject anything that is not clear and distinct, he says, specifically. Never accept anything as true that I do not know evidently to be so. That is, carefully to avoid precipitous judgment and prejudice, and to include nothing more in my judgment than what presented itself to my mind with such clarity and distinctness that I would have no occasion to put it to doubt. So clarity and distinctness. Remember that phrase, because that's the key phrase of how he's going to judge every idea that comes to him. Number 2, break large questions down into smaller ones. Okay, to divide each of the difficulties I was examining to as many parts as possible and as is required to solve them. Okay, every question he views, everything about knowledge is atomistic. It can be broken down to smaller pieces. Number 3, to conduct my thoughts in an orderly fashion, commencing with the simplest and easiest to know objects, to rise gradually, as by degrees, to the knowledge of the most composite thing, and even supposing an order among those things which do not naturally precede one another. So he's going to be open-minded, look for connections that he did maybe not have noticed before, and let things go where they go, but he's going to build up from the simple ideas to the complex. And finally, his fourth rule is to make enumeration so complete and review so general that I would be sure of having omitted nothing. It's going to take his time. It's going to go slow. He says another part, I'm going to take it slow. I'm going to be very careful. Okay? But his assumptions get him into trouble. Okay? He says, before he tell you what the trouble he gets into, he says, first of all, he wants to make a distinction between himself and what skeptics do. Skeptics in his day say, we don't know nothing, and therefore we don't have to do anything. Nothing can be known, so therefore I don't have to commit to anything. It's a way of escaping responsibility for the mind God gave you, so to speak. Okay, and a lot of indecisiveness there. He was that, and they were a lot of skeptics in those days thought it thrilling to sit down and destroy somebody else's belief system and offer nothing in replace, which I think is okay, but I don't know I get much joy out of that.
What's an example?
Oh, Diderot. You know who Diderot is? He's an encyclopedist from France, very famous. He spent a good deal of time with Catherine the Great.
In Moscow, or actually in St. Petersburg, at the time that's where the capital was. And he spent 6 or 8 months there, and he spent most of his time trying to tell her how the Russian Orthodox Church was a bunch of lies, et cetera, et cetera. And she came out of it very shaken. And she asked him, in a letter, she says to him, "And why did you find it necessary to do that?" And he never answers. And this kind of attitude that some of the things, Voltaire had a similar attitude, though Voltaire was much more passionate about truth and justice than Diderot was, and they were friends. So it's an attitude some people have that if I can destroy what you believe, that somehow strengthens what I believe. And I don't know, I have a hard time doing that. I'd rather we walk together and find out where the path's going. Anyway, that's just my personal side there. So he's got these 4 rules, and he declares he's not like other ones. He's not indecisive. He's not he's committing to stuff, and he just says he's not doubting for doubt's sake.
Did he use the term skeptic when he referred to himself?
No, he never did.
But was the term common in those days?
Yes, it was very common today. And in those days, what you have is we have the rise of the deist, of course. Okay, and as deists come up, they want to go over to the side of science by itself, materialism, but they're afraid to let go of their theology, so they get this kind of fuzzy deist kind of view. And a lot of the philosophers of those days, including Descartes, were, yeah, God exists. What about him? I don't know. That sort of kind of attitude about it, you know. And a lot of times they do it because they have to in their culture. You know, you get a lot of trouble. You know, Voltaire was different.
So it's just believing in something just for the hell of it? From what you're saying?
Do I think they should?
Yeah.
Good.
Because it sounds like from what
I doubt that there's anything that you could believe in for the hell of it.
Oh, okay.
I think that our brains just would reject that. My brain would. I think you have to, my personal thing is you have to do a lot of investigation. You have to be willing to say you're wrong and find out where you're right. And keep an open mind. I like to start every conversation with 4 words. I could be wrong. I think it's a good habit.
All right. So that's, he says he's not skeptical. He says, I was aping the skeptics who doubt merely for the sake of doubting and put on the affection of perpetual indecision. For on the contrary, my entire plan tended simply to give me assurance and to reject shifting ground and sand as to find rock or clay. Again, he's looking for certainty. Yeah, that's what he's after. Okay, so here's where his method led him. First, the method requires him to reject the truth of our senses, okay, which is the point at which he disagrees with most of the philosophers of his day, who are empiricists. You know, if I touch it, it's real. If I smell it, it's real. He decided, for a long time I had noticed that in moral matters, one must sometimes follow opinions that one knows are quite uncertain. Not untrue, uncertain. Just as if they were indubitable, as has been said above, but since I desired to attend only to such search for truth, I thought it necessary that I do exactly the opposite, and that I reject as absolutely false everything in which I could imagine the least doubt, so as to see whether, after this process, anything in my set of beliefs remains that is entirely indubitable. Thus, since our senses sometimes deceive us, I decided to suppose that nothing was exactly as our senses would have us imagine. He's rejecting empirical knowledge.
And he says, and he resolves, to pretend that everything that had ever entered my mind was no more than the illusion of my dreams. That's as close as you can get, I think, to wiping your head of ideas. I think he's unsuccessful. We'll get to that. Now, as most people say, rejection of Emerson's reliance upon sense experience, is a turning point for him, because now he's cut himself loose from all the philosophers around him. And he says, following this, reflecting upon the fact that I doubted, okay, he knows he doubts because he's already set himself to doubt, and that as a consequence, my being was not utterly perfect. Okay, now this is a difficult concept for us to get today these days, because perfection is, we think of it as moral perfection usually, or bodily perfection of some kind. But when he's talking practical perfection, he's talking to the complexity of your mind, how your mind is able to comprehend. A perfect mind, in his would be able to comprehend the infinite. Anything short of that can't comprehend it. I think this is one of the mistakes he makes, but okay. I decided to search for the source from which I had learned to think of things more perfect, things he could not think of with his own mind, than myself. I readily knew that this ought to originate from some nature that was in effect more perfect. Now you see where he's going. This is an ontological argument for the existence of God. That's what he's putting forth here. Now, how he gets there, I skipped a little paragraph here, is he says, I doubt. I could not doubt if I did not exist. And in linguistics, we think of this as the verb-noun relationship. Okay? If somebody raises their hand, the hand has to exist. Actions cannot go without nouns. Verbs cannot exist without nouns. Okay? So that's what he's discovering here. Okay? So he knows he's doubt. He says, I doubt, and doubt is a form of thinking. So therefore, a verb, doubting, means I exist. And really what Descartes should have said is, I doubt, therefore I exist. But of course, the language there, what does that mean? A little stranger. All right, so I think, therefore I am is what he came up with. And from that, he moves to there is activity or something, okay, to this. Okay, since doubting is an action, the doubter must exist. Doubting shows uncertainty. Now, this is how we get to the perfection thing. Doubting shows uncertainty. Thus, the doubter is limited in what he can know. Okay? The limits of knowledge mean that anything known in spite of doubt must be innate. This is explicating how he gets to God exists. And finally, he says, innate knowledge can only be present by one sufficient enough to know without doubt. Okay, I don't agree with Descartes. I think there's a logical mistake here, but this was a very powerful argument for about 20 years. After that, everybody forgot the argument about the ontological argument for the existence of God inherent in that, but they remembered the doubt part. They remembered to doubt everything. Okay, and that's really kind of... Okay, he says, summarizing logic by saying this: to pretend I had no body and that there were no world or any place where I was, I could do. But that I could not pretend on that account that I did not exist. And that on the contrary, from the very fact that I thought about doubting the truth of others, it followed evidently and very certainly that I existed. That's how he gets to, I think, therefore I am. Now, when you hear the words, I think, therefore I am, it's intuitive, isn't it? Well, of course. What's so hard about that? But you have to recognize that he's trying not just to make it intuitively knowledge, he's trying to make it so logical that you don't need intuition. That it's just there, and you can't deny it. So that's where he's going. Now, from all this, I can summarize. I just did this part here, okay? This is his summary of how he got to I think, therefore I am, and how he got to that God therefore exists. Because he said, I have this idea of God. I could not comprehend that idea. I could not think of that idea except that God put it in me. That's his summation. His first error, in my opinion, the entire aim of his entire corpus is to prove two things: the existence of God and the existence of the soul. And he uses the same techniques in both. He uses ontological innate knowledge. He categorizes things as innate. Now, Immanuel Kant comes out after him and says, no, there's no such thing as innate knowledge. He calls it there's analytical and synthetic knowledge, and he goes on a big thing about no. And he hits Descartes very hard on that. And in fact, in the argument that follows, not between Descartes because he's already died, but in the argument in the academic circles, Descartes his reputation never recovers. And the argument is kind of ho-hum in most people's thought, mine included. All right. First of all. Now, his first mistake, I think, is he thinks of knowledge as idiosyncratic. Only the individual knows. But in fact language transmits knowledge, right? If I walk into the Egyptian library today and I pick up a book that has not been read by anybody for 3,000 years, and I can read the language, let's assume, I open it up, I can discover things encoded in that book, right? Okay? Language carries meaning. Language carries knowledge. It's not the brain, it's the language. Point two, you cannot know what you know unless you can construct it with language or symbolically. If I ask you to tell me what you know, there's no way for you to tell me. There's no way for you to even know what you know until you put it into some kind of language. That's how we discover what we know in a lot of times, even as we're speaking. You ever had that experience? You're speaking, you go, oh, I didn't know that. That happens quite a bit. Good if you talk a lot, like I do. Okay. Finally, third thing, language shapes what we can know and what we cannot know. Benjamin Whorf and Edward Sapir hypothesis. The Benjamin Whorf hypothesis says every language has a range of things it can express and things it cannot express. If it can't express it, you can't know it. Okay, and that's the thing. And they do a lot of work on this, and you should read up on them because they're very, very good at this thing. And at the point I've come to a conclusion after 30 years of studying this kind of stuff that they're probably right. If you translate some things, if you do any translation work at all, and I have not done any appreciable amount, but my linguist friends who do will tell you that sometimes you have to throw up their hands and do an approximation because you can't carry the idea over. You have to be embedded in that culture, in that language, to get some of them, and the language does that. So Descartes thinks he can wipe a slate clean. He's carrying his French and his Latin in with him, and they will shape his ideas. And so he can't do it. That's error number one.
The statement, if we can't, and I'm maybe misstating what you said, if we can't express it in language, we can't know it.
No, we can't know that we know it. I do that trick someday, Bill. You can't know that you know something unless you can express it to yourself in language and symbolically. Because a lot of knowledge is reflective. It reflects your experience.
So are you representing Descartes at this point, or is this?
No, this is my critique of Descartes, okay. And I'm saying that he didn't know this, and one of my professors once criticized me because I was writing an article on David Hume, and the article was critiquing David Hume from a statistical point of view, his argument of probability and all that, and my professor's comment was, Hume didn't know statistics, he didn't know probability. Probability theory was 100 years in the future from him. And, but from a historical shame on Hume point of view, yeah, that's true. But on the other hand, it's still, the argument, the critique still works because it works, I don't blame Descartes for missing this, but he still missed it. Okay. All right. In error number 2, knowledge is direct. What is known as clear and distinct is a judgment call, isn't it? He's telling you that internal feeling he has, sense that he has, is sufficient to establish the truth of something. But in fact, at one point he says it either comes from that clear and distinct sense comes from having arrived there by logic, or it's a delusion. He admits that it could be just a delusion. So therefore, all his certainty, built on clear and distinct, gets him nowhere. Okay? Transmitting knowledge involves recognizing it as knowledge. In other words, you have to put it out symbolically, and people have to carry it. It does move across from mind to mind, language speakers. You must translate it as symbols. I've already covered that. The symbol set is limited. This is one of the things that Worf-Safer hypothesis talks about. The language concepts, the memes you have in your life, are limited. I listen to a lot of Korean stuff, movies, TV, something like that, and there are things they do that cannot be translated. There's relationships. Their relationships are much more complex than ours. We have brother and sister. They have older brother, younger brother, same brother, not brother, sometimes a brother, maybe a brother. Just all these terminology, ways of putting things that we just don't have categories for. So we don't have the memes in our head for them, so we can't have the words for them. We can't have the words for them. We can't communicate them, except for taking a lot of time to do so. So it's interesting. Therefore, from his standpoint, because it's based on clear and distinct, it's a psychological certainty, not a logical one, and certainly not a statistical one. You know,
About Descartes.
yep, taking a look at my critique of Descartes. Okay, that's what I've done. This is his second error.
Whose statement is the last statement?
Oh, mine. That's mine. I'm just saying that about him. That his logic, his reasoning was only a psychological certainty, not a logical one. Because of the previous mistakes he's made, the two errors that he had. Okay, now, let's see if I can read this part. Yeah, no, that's fine. Okay, so postmodern objection. Now, this is the area I love to talk about, but we've just leaped over about 300 years to get here.
What postmodern means? I've heard that.
Yeah, I'll get to that in just a second. My original intent was here to go from Descartes to Nietzsche. And Nietzsche was 1900 or so. And to show how the doubting thing, I can't do that in the time we have, otherwise you'd be here 4 hours, and then I still wouldn't be done because I can talk a long time.
Sit down. But I decided that I would just leap ahead and kind of...
me when I say that the idea of radical doubt stays in philosophy. Will Durant, in A Short History of Philosophy, says, when he's speaking of Voltaire, he talks about how he makes the statement that doubt was born by Descartes, given birth by Descartes as a philosophical category, and continues to dominate philosophy to this day. That was 1926 or so. And it still is today. Doubt is the king. And the second part of what I would like to do, if I ever get lucky enough to get back, if you don't throw stones at me, is to do that tracing of those through Spinoza and some of the other guys. And then finally, the third part is what's kind of squeezed together here, is how it affects us today and what the road ahead means. I started my little talk here with the words "once upon a time," and I told you that that's where we're at. It's always about a story. What story are you trying to tell? Trying to put forward. Give you more power, your group more power. It's how you can tell history. Everything about modern philosophy, post-structuralism, says tear down the structures of understanding you had that lead to you to believe your group is powerful. Feminists
tear down the patriarchal stories. Okay? Tear it down. Show how every moral story I tell is designed to reinforce my position or my group's position, to make me look good, like the winners tell the story of the war. This is the predominant thing. Now, in politics and in the press, no good newspaper man would interview you without already coming with an idea of what story he or she was going to tell. And if anybody ever wants to interview me, I get the first question. My first question would be to that person, what story did you come ready to tell? Because it's a story. Everything's a story. They're not reporting. They're telling a story. I personally think that in 2008, the story was black man becomes president. I don't think there's anything wrong with that story. Doesn't bother me a bit. But I think that's the story they wanted to tell, and I think that's why Hillary Clinton didn't win in 2008. It was a better story in somebody. And so an angle, and if you watch TV, the guy comes into the newsroom and the first thing the editor says, what's the angle on this? They want to tell a story. Now, if you think about it, newspapers sell because of controversy. You don't sell a newspaper that says everybody got along just fine, thank you very much. Nobody read it. So there's an inherent drive to make things controversial in newspapers. Catherine Jameson on Power in the Press, you should read that book. She writes about how the presidency and the press work back and forth and how they're necessary to each other, which I kind of wonder about anymore. Anyway, these are three things. There are no blank slates possible. That's the first thing that everybody's born into a culture, they speak a language, they get a shape, and it's very little. Most people make their commitments to their politics and their religion very early in life, and when they make that commitment, it's very, very hard to get them to actually think anything outside their committed box, because most people are scared. My personal feeling is most people are afraid to actually talk about what they think and what they believe. Second, ideas are not objects. This is a big one. Descartes makes things. Ideas are not objects, but if you treat an idea as an object, you can categorize it in the terms of Kenneth Burke as a God or a devil term. So there's a polarization of language that goes on. Certain terms to some groups are God terms, and to other groups are devil terms. And eventually the two groups or three groups, whatever it happens to be, start using these terms as mantras rather than actually having a conversation. And that's because they don't believe the other side. They doubt the other side automatically. Don't give them the time of day. It's just pervasive doubt. And traditional logic is insufficient or restrictive. This is a little harder to get to, but what are their names? Knowles. John and Martha Knowles write a book on Aristotle in which they discuss Aristotle's logic. And they show in that book Venn diagrams and whatnot, and syllogisms and enthemy, if you know all that stuff. They show in that book that all our reasoning, traditional reasoning, is a two-dimensional process. And the great thing about it is when you realize that, you realize there could be other ways to reason. And that's their point. They're very much in the feminist mode, and they're trying to make the point that traditional, and they say, Derrida says that male-dominated logic should be thrown out because it's male. And the intuitive Eastern logic is equally valuable. And that males, and this is the argument that Knowles makes, males have used their logic to put women down. Okay, that's a very feminist thing. So my point is, that's where we're at today. It's just constantly doubting one another. Ultimately, Descartes' mistake is that he doubts all the people around him. And having doubted everybody around you and not trusting anybody, where are you going to go? But inside. Once you go inside, we all become gods of our own knowledge. But anyway, that's what it is. So I hope you didn't think that this was just a story. But if you did, that's okay too. Any questions, comments?
Why do you think, I tend to agree that like the modern kind of look at things as this almost like Descartes like piece, that a lot of people aren't reading Knowles and all of this. How do you think that this is filtered out to the popular
today all you have to do is spend about 5 hours on any forum, and you begin to see it doesn't matter what you say. A person will say to you over and over and over again, I don't care what you think. I know. Therefore, whatever evidence, whatever argument you bring, it doesn't matter. We see it in political camps. Okay? I listen to NPR a lot. And occasionally I will stray over to the talk radio. And I don't think I'm in a different world when I go to a talk radio. I think I'm in a different galaxy. Okay? They're two scientists like, what are they talking about? They're not even talking about the same subject, and yet they're both using God and devil terms to castigate the other. They're not interested in having a conversation. Okay? Because they have so little distrust of other human beings. And I've seen this not just in the big scope, I've seen it in the small scope. I've seen groups of people, 5 or 6 people, throw a member out because that member disagreed with them. That was me, by the way. And now these are a group of people who argue for peace and justice. And yet, I disagreed with one of them, and the next thing I got was a letter saying, you're out. And I thought about it a long time, and I realized nobody asked me my opinion after that. Nobody asked me what my side of the story was. They just voted me out. And I realized that people's commitments are generally too tight and too hard because most of the time I think they're scared. I think they're scared to really listen to the other side. I think especially speakers like myself, one of the biggest things to realize is that, as Plato said, there are guardians in the world. One of the categories of people is guardians, people who stand up and guard, i.e. defend their truth. And I don't want to be a guardian. I'd rather be a philosopher. And that's my take on it. Yeah.
Just one sentence you said probably 20 minutes ago or so. I'd rather us walk together and find out where the path is going. Yeah. It really jumped out at me. You were talking about people who want to
Throw stones at the other guy.
Well, or disprove, convince them that they're wrong or false or whatever, and just almost for the sport of it. I was talking with a woman just 2 days ago who was telling me about her experience as a mom, and she got 4 kids, but the oldest is now a senior in high school, and how starting in about 9th or 10th grade, he began to project their religious background that they were bringing their kids up in. And so for like 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, he didn't believe in any of that anymore. But then she said just in the last couple of weeks he's wanted to talk to me because he said, nobody out there believes in anything. And it's like there's no basis. Now she used the word truth. She goes, he feels like, it seems like he feels like the need for truth. And I just kind of listened to her story and said, wow, that's interesting, or that's cool, or whatever. But what I'm thinking inside is, do you just need truth for its own sake, or does it actually matter if it's true in some sense or whatever?
Yeah.
And, and that's where we get into traditional logic or whatever. As long as it's true for you, and that's fine. I'm not worried about that.
I think though that one of the hardest things to do for me, for anybody, I think, is to recognize that it's much easier to tear down than to build up.
Yeah.
And no matter what your faith, religion, philosophy is, if it's, I want to go tear down, I just don't have much respect for that.
Right.
Now that's my personal moral choice to care about people. Logically, Nietzsche would have said, so what? Who cares?
Yeah.
And Nietzsche said everything's just desire anyway. Okay, but I have this thing that I think loving your fellow man is important. Therefore, I'm not going to tear somebody's system down without something to replace it, to help them replace it. Process, grow myself. Yeah.
But I was thinking, Nietzsche, I think gets, he's the naked guy running through the woods, philosopher wants. He's raised in a time where, Napoleon, before him, completely uprooted the social order. No longer is the aristocracy running everything. It's being overturned by the bourgeois and the middle class, which is Spain, you have totally different, like, an idea. So, you know, but is that, you know, do you think there's a cultural reason why this is coming back, I guess? I think Nietzsche is a product of his time, in part.
Yeah, Nietzsche actually, I was thinking Nietzsche as the culmination of Descartes' reasoning. Because if you trace it through Spinoza and Schopenhauer and some of the other guys through there, Hume and Kierkegaard is the other branch, you get to the point of recognizing that they all get to the point of recognizing that there is no universal truth out there that everybody will recognize. And Nietzsche says, therefore, even your reason is in slavery to your desires. Desire to him is the key of everything, and the desire you have is power. That's Nietzsche's key concept. So when you read Nietzsche, you realize that, yeah, if you start with, I'm the knower, it's up to me to know, and whatever you know don't count, you're going to get to the point where, therefore, my power is what counts. And Nietzsche's Superman. Yeah, it's interesting that his view of Superman in The Antichrist, his book, he talks a lot about that, how the Superman will rise up. But he, interestingly said, does not think of himself as the Superman. To him, the Superman is the one who can let go of all this crapola, I think he'd use that word, that he's been given, and just do what he wants to do. And do it because he wants to do it. And needless to say, if you did that, you'd be an anarchist. And shortly thereafter, an anarchist started the First World War. So I think the ideas have consequences, as Richard Weaver says.
And then talk about truth and power. I think everybody's, if they're searching for power, they're going to find a truth that fits that allows them to get power.
Yeah.
But if you're going for truth, truth may not always give you power.
Sure.
So it's kind of a split there. So in your case, you're looking for truth, but you may not have enough power. Somebody else might be looking for power, so they're, for example, our country right now. The truth is we need to keep our country safe. Some people really believe that. They've got the power. People who don't have that power are saying, we have a different view of immigration and that kind of stuff, and they don't have the power. So what's the truth? That everybody's equal and everybody belongs? Or do we protect our country and squelch our rights? So there's a big difference there.
It's not, I think it seems strange to me that, you know, this new administration is talking about like this and keeping America safe like it's a new idea, as if we haven't been tackling these issues all along. And that, I mean, I think that it's a valid concern that these type of dramatic actions, without even consulting with the experts, before making these decisions, to see what the outcomes and the problems are going to be, and how to deal with them. I mean, none of that happened. So
Well, I don't know what happened. No, I wasn't there.
I believe that it. I mean, right, I mean, I'm listening to.
That's the problem. So often we have so little information to go on. My wife, who is much more conservative than I am, will constantly reading me these reports from this or that report, and I'm always saying to her, I said, yeah, but what's the context? What did the guy do? What did he know? What evidence do you have for that? And she's always saying, well, I said, you believe it because you already believe it. And the tendency of rhetoric these days is not to convince, but to rally. Talk radio is all about rallying the troops. That's, you know, and it started way back in 1932 or so with Franklin Delano Roosevelt. These fireside chats were about rallying the troops. And it becomes, it's in classical rhetoric, it's called athotic rhetoric, and it's where the speaker stands up to the front and says, in some way, I'm so much one of you that you're going to believe me. Now, that's Bill Clinton saying, I feel your pain. Okay? Now, that resonated, didn't it? If you remember that day, he said it. And people responded to that. And Ronald Reagan, with his stories, the Republicans were a little late getting to it. They got there in 1980, and the Democrats got there a little sooner. But the new left is what it was called. Anyway, I can go off about that. I'll stop.
Can we go? Let's go back to the, if I could, go back for a minute to the idea of skepticism and a contemporary view of skepticism, not Descartes' view, but I guess, my view. For want of something better. And my feeling is that skepticism doesn't mean, as it did in Descartes' day, that you doubt everything. Because I think that people do have beliefs. I think people have beliefs about the world. And they can still be a skeptic and have beliefs. And I think, to me, my skepticism is a question of what kinds of evidence I find persuasive, or what kinds of evidence that I respect, versus what kind of evidence do I think doesn't deserve the same level of respect. And I think, for me, being a skeptic means I don't accept something, I don't believe something because somebody told me it. I believe it because there's objective evidence that I can look for myself. If somebody says, if you take 24 people at random, the odds of 2 of them having the same birthday is greater than 50%, I'd say, come on, right offhand I say, I'm not going to believe that just because you told me that. I'm going to have to figure that out for myself, either by doing additional research, and that's the kind of question, kind of research that you.
What if the person you were talking to were a master, a PhD of statistical analysis?
Well,
and they had already told you 17 different things that turned out to be true that you didn't think true at first.
I'd give them quite a bit of respect. Yeah, no, and that's a question, and that's a serious question I have, because I have friends of faith who say, I believe this because it's written in the Scripture. It's written in Scripture. Or this is what Christ said, or you're poring over the Bible and saying it's written right here in 2 Samuel, okay? And I'm thinking, why should I respect that? And they're saying, why should I respect an opinion written in a professional journal, okay? That's simply written by somebody else.
Yeah.
Why should one deserve better respect than the other? But I think that is, to me, that is the essence of skepticism, is to look at the types of evidence that
the problem with skepticism today is not that you shouldn't be skeptical. But I tend to say this. What's your name again?
Sarah.
Sarah. Suppose you came up to me and say, hey, there's a 6-foot red bunny out in the lobby out there. I'd probably look at you and go, really? And I'd walk out and check. Now, most people would go, you're nuts, and they wouldn't bother checking. My thing with skepticism is healthy if it says, this is a human being. I don't think she's lying to me. I've known Sarah for a while. She's not usually a liar. Okay, and she's not delusional. You're not usually delusional, are you? Okay, just to check and make sure. Maybe I should ask these people. No, anyway, okay, so I give her the benefit of the doubt, but I don't jump out and start getting my shotgun and go shoot the rabbit. I do. And I think that that's a better, healthier. Most people, though, if you tell them something that they don't agree with, have an intuitive sense about, boy, that's weird, they just shut it down. They don't give the benefit of the doubt to the speaker to actually investigate. And this was David Hume in his Miracles. At the end of the thing on miracles, he says, I have given up. No, it's actually a letter written about miracles. He says, I've given up even listening to people anymore about whether there are miracles or not, because to my mind, it's just a waste of time. I'd never do that. It's never a waste of time to listen to another human being, no matter who they are.
Well, okay, let me play devil's advocate.
Okay.
What if somebody says, I believe that the earth is flat, okay? I mean, would you give them a...
Yep. I would ask them what their evidence was. I do it all the time.
Well, they've got a tract that they've got that talks about,
Sure, they have a tract, and that's where this guy
I mean, at some point you have to say, we've dismissed this. We're not going to, it's not worth discussing anymore.
Almost all things that people say that are strange like that, their depth is very shallow. A couple, 3 questions, and you presented them their own lack of depth, and as far as you go. I said, well, when you figure that out, when you find the evidence for this guy writing that, let me know. It's done. And I do it all the time. And I do it politely because I still don't know. They might be right. Maybe the world is flat. I've not investigated. Have you investigated? Anybody actually did a serious investigation?
I think there's a difference between being skeptical and how you respond as a skeptic. Because I think there's some issues, I don't care. If there's a red bunny out in the lobby, maybe I care, maybe I don't. If the world's round, so this guy said the world's flat, maybe I don't care what he thinks. And I do agree that there should be inspection, introspection about religion, about what we believe, everything, and there's ways to do that, but I don't necessarily think that we have to, we can be skeptical, but we don't have to care about it.
Yeah, I suspect you're right, that more in practice, that there's probably some questions are asked me that I don't give the time of day, but I never shut people down. I never tell them you're nuts or anything. I go, usually I'll say, well, that's interesting, and then I'll change the subject. Because, I don't know, it depends on the person, how well I know them. I get people in my shop all the time. I had a guy just the other day walk in, and we spent probably an hour and a half talking philosophy. It was great. I've been more than a time, we had a conversation there, and once in a while you hear people like that. It's not nice. And it's nice to own your own company and do that.
I think the principles of free speech demand, though, that you do listen to the flat earth argument, because it's not just the right of the speaker to be heard, but of the audience to hear it. Because it might contain a grain or, a grain of truth that might be worth listening to. And I think that's why it needs extra protection. So if you do start saying, like, no, we don't need to hear that argument at all, and reestablish the first principles, then you can get on this way to getting rid of other good arguments.
I guess going to, the example of the flat earth, it's a topic that I sort of growing up, I learned about that the earth is spherical, and I learned, reasons why we believe that. There's evidence, there's a huge amount of evidence in favor of the fact that the earth is round, okay? And at some point you say, well, do you have anything new to offer me? Because I've covered this. It's the same with the principles of evolution. At some point you say, and I have a lot of friends of faith who say, read this book on refuting evolution. And I'm thinking, that's going to take me like 10 or 12 hours to read that. I'm just not going to do it. I'm sorry. And at some point, you just think, my life is too short. I'm not going to keep reading. I'm not going to.
Yeah, maybe so.
But somebody else may take it. Yeah. I think I learned more about evolution trying to help debunk creationism that I would have probably wouldn't have otherwise. So in that way, there's a certain line.
Yeah, and that's the thing is there are too many people speaking about things that they have not studied, have not done the research and their homework on. And evolution is one thing I won't speak on. I've never done enough homework on it, so I don't talk about it.
I think, John, where it maybe underlies your comment, or your premise from introducing that, is that I have friends who, and these people are your friends, and that's where I made the connection with what you said earlier. Rather than trying to tear down or prove that they're false, it's just more of a posture than it is an intellectual argument to say, can we have conversation? Can we still be friends? Can we still be fellow human beings, even though there's obviously this great rift? And it sounds to me like you've found that with a lot of people, and that maybe is partly the take home from this. Some people, I feel like in my experience, are just more naturally prone to skepticism and doubt and asking questions and more of a secular mindset. I'm that way. Other people that I know are that way, but I feel like I know far more who just aren't. And they accept what they've been taught. And if you take it over into the political arena right now, can we still be in dialogue with those family members, those coworkers, and not make it so toxic and hostile? I appreciate your emphasis on let's not make it that way because no one benefits.
I think that I would venture to say that most of you here are old-fashioned and behind the times. Because most of you here probably think that you can know truth. This is what the millennials, I was listening to a psychologist the other day who was talking about characteristics of millennials. And really, overwhelmingly, millennials do not believe that there's any truth outside of themselves. Nothing is true outside of themselves.
Nothing is true, or that they can't know truth.
They can't know it. As Gorgias said,
Different story. That's a different question.
Going back to the Greeks, Gorgias said, nothing exists. If it did exist, you couldn't know it, and therefore you could communicate to anybody. They're in that sophist view that even if I know what it is, I can't tell anybody because they aren't going to believe what I have to say anyway. And so it's very isolated, very idiosyncratic group, very, very isolated. And the irony is they're isolated at the same time they're more connected. But they only connect with people they like. That's both. That's not a subject. Any other questions? Because I think it's probably getting late and I don't want to. My voice is getting tired.
It's almost 10 after 8.
Yeah. People are free to like hang around and talk if you want, but thanks, appreciate you.
Thanks for putting up with us. If anybody wants to get scrubbed out, let me know.
Oh, LOL.
If there's anything personal that you don't want people to know on if we end up posting the video, I don't know if people are not. I'll take a look at it when I go over. If anybody needs to be scrubbed out of the video, we're
Scrubbed out.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes, scrub me out. I don't want to.
Just Photoshop.
You are from a land where you need to go.
Well, I'll find an angle I got for you guys.
Thank you for those first ones that hit.
Let's put a cartoon character over it.
I think I have an answer. Mark, thanks very much.
Shut them down.
Company, say you have your own company?
That's
enough.
Yeah, not anymore. Probably getting out.
Really?
Our goes down.